Which flour is best for feeding your sourdough starter? Well, I don't know, so we're going to do a little experiment and see which one turns out best. I know which flour I prefer to bake my bread with, but I don't know which flour actually gives us the best starter. So I have got 4 starters that I fed with 4 very different types of flour. So the first one I've got is plain flour, the second one is a Canadian, the third one is just a standard strong white bread flour, and then the fourth one is rye flour. Now this is a question that I get an awful lot, and I don't actually know the answer to it because I've never actually done it, but now I have. In each pot I have mixed up 10 grams of starter, 20 grams of water, and then 20 grams of the flour. And I've mixed them all together, and then we're going to put them in little pots and then see how they grow. Which one grows the fastest, which one grows the highest, which one's got the most bubbles, and then we're going to come back and take a little look at that. But just looking at the protein content, this one here is just a standard plain flour, and that's got 9.7 grams of protein. Then we've got the Canadian flour, which has got 14.9 grams. Then we've got the standard strong white bread flour with 12 grams of protein. And then we've got the rye flour that has 10.3 grams of protein in it. Now this is a flour that is recommended if your starter is being a bit sluggish or just slow to get started with. So it'd be really interesting to see how they all compare against each other. So the first one I'm going to put in here is the rye flour. And you can see that they're all incredibly different. So the rye one has made a very, very thick paste, and that's not going anywhere. So we're going to pop that in there. Then the standard strong white bread flour has made also a very thick paste, not as thick as that one, but certainly very, very thick. Slightly stringy almost. There we go. Slightly different colour, that one as well. These ones are very, very white. So this one feels thinner than that one. I don't know if that's going to make a difference. Pop the lid on there. And then the fourth one is the plain flour, and this one is incredibly runny. Can you see how different that was to the rye flour? It's just so runny. So it'd be interesting to see how that compares with regards to the rise, the bubbles, and potentially how thick it is when it's at its peak. All 4 are in their jars, and then we're going to come back and take a little look and see what the results of these are. Which one do you think is going to be the best for a sourdough starter? It's been about 3 hours now, and I would say they're all looking kind of even Stevens at the moment. The only thing I would say is that the plain flour has definitely got more condensation than the other ones, and the rye flour has a lot more spots in the condensation. So they are definitely all doing something quite different, and you can see the rye flour is absolutely full of bubbles already, although hasn't risen very much. The plain flour is doing fantastic, and then these 2 over here are doing very well as well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these turn out. It's been about 3 hours and they're all looking incredibly different. And as I said, the plain flour was definitely looking like it had more condensation in it. And if you look really carefully, you can see that it's actually already had its peak and it's already starting to drop. So this one is giving us, definitely when we look inside, full of bubbles and looking really good. Looking quite thin though. Yeah, it looks like it's really hungry already, crikey. So that one has peaked really, really quickly. We have got bubbles, it's incredibly thin, but it's peaked very quickly. And that's just the standard bread flour with the protein at around 9 something grams. So let's take a quick look at the other ones. So the rye is looking fantastic. It's on the way up, but can you just see that the condensation has actually got like bubbles in it? Isn't that weird? Like it's imitating the actual starter itself. Then we've got the strong white bread flour and the Canadian, and they both look to be almost identical. Almost, although, let's have a little look inside, see what they look like in there. Yeah, they look absolutely identical. It's just that the Canadian one is definitely looking whiter. Don't know why. But yeah, they're looking pretty identical at the moment. And I can see the doming on the side of this. Difficult to see on camera, but they look like they're definitely still rising. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. So the plain flour's now out of the game. And we've got the last three here. It's been another hour, so about 4 hours since I fed them. And the Canadian bread flour has started to deflate. As you can see, let me see if I can hold them up a bit better for you without dropping them. Can you see that the strong white bread flour is definitely still on the rise, whereas the Canadian is starting to fall? If I show you from inside, it'll be easier to show you. So we can see that the strong white bread flour, oh gosh, look at those bubbles in there. But the Canadian, it's very hard to see the sort of 3D of this, but the Canadian one is definitely falling. Now, it does have some amazing bubbles in there, but that's the Canadian one that's had its peak and is now starting to fall. So now it's neck and neck with, surprisingly, the strong white bread flour. I really thought that the Canadian one would outsmart the strong white bread flour, because that's just a standard strong white bread flour, nothing fancy about that one. And the rye. And these two are, if anything, the strong white bread flour is actually doing better than the rye with regards to the rise, but the rye's got more bubbles. So that's really interesting. So let's leave these ones for a little bit longer and just see what happens to them. It's been another hour, and it is definitely, at this moment in time, showing that the strong white bread flour is currently outcompeting the rye with regards to the growth. Now, they've both been fed with a 1:2:2 ratio, and had the same starter when they began, so it'd be interesting to see sort of how they finish. Now, I'm not going to stir them right now. I'm going to have a little look at them in a little while, but actually it's bedtime now, so we may have to see in the morning what happens to these two. I'm not quite sure, because it might be that the rye is thicker and that the strong white bread flour... Actually, because I can't stir these until the morning, I'm going to stir them now, even though they're not complete, just so we can just see the consistency. So this is the strong white bread flour. Gosh, that is such a thick consistency. And the bubbles in there are fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to now do the rye. I'm going to take a look and see how that differs from that one. Wow, that's completely different. Gosh, that's not stringy at all. That's very different consistency. Okay, I'm going to put the lids back on and we're going to come back in the morning and see what they look like, and we'll be able to see where they grew to and what they did. But I'm going to leave all 4 of them there anyway overnight, and then we shall take a little look. It's the next morning now, and it was these two that were up against each other. Now, as we can see, the strong white flour definitely rose all the way to the top there and is now dropped back down completely. But the rye flour is still sort of hanging on and still really full of bubbles. If we look at the side of the jars, the strong white flour did actually go taller, and they were all given the same feed, but this one did rise the tallest out of all of them. Let's take a look inside and see what they look like. I know they've already had their peak, but let's have a little look anyway. Okay, it's looking quite thin, but of course it is long past its peak. And then we've got the rye. Let's take a look. Now, I've never used rye before, so I'm not sure if it's supposed to look like that. But anyway, I'd say this one followed by that one.